Thank you so much, Honorable Chair, Minister Zulu of South Africa. Thank you also, Honorable Minister of Zimbabwe for Health and Childcare. Excellencies with me on the podium, Excellencies in the room, my colleagues in UNFPA. I'm going to give a very short overview of the ICPD 30 process that you know where this conference is situated in. It's situated in a larger process that's happening in the world right now in terms of reviewing 30 years of achievements, but also still remaining challenges when it comes to the implementation of that landmark agreement that 179 countries signed in 1994 in Cairo and that have subsequently been developed. So if my presentation can go up, then it would be great because I have a few slides that we can quickly go over. So the march still continues, unfortunately, I have to say. Because remember, the ICPD program of action was actually a 20-year program, not a 30-year program or a 40-year program. It was actually 20 years, but we didn't make it. And so we continue to march towards some of the main premises of that program. I thought it's very good to actually look a little bit at where it is situated. So 2 years ago in the Commission on Population Development, that is actually the body in the UN that reviews the implementation of the ICPD program of action, the members states, the UN member states decided that in 2024 we're going to review again the ICPD program of action in a comprehensive manner. What have we achieved in the last 30 years? And what is actually nice is that this commemoration actually takes place between a number of landmark events in the UN. We just had the SDG summit, and someone this morning remarked already that we are not making a lot of progress with these SDGs. Actually, only 15% of the indicators are actually being met. We're really off track. That was just last month. Then, of course, we have a very important conference coming up for small island development states, SIDS, in Antigua and Barbuda in May. And then, of course, there's a big summit next year planned called the Summit of the Future, where a pact for the future will be discussed and hopefully agreed upon by member states. And this is really a forward-looking pact. What will be the challenges of humanity in the next development decade? So it is within that context that, of course, the CPD, the Commission on Population Development, will meet to discuss what has happened with ICPD. It's important to realize that it is not a new agenda. We're not going to renegotiate an ICPD. We're going to look at what has happened, what are the gaps, what are the challenges, as Minister Zulu also mentioned, and how can we move this forward. I think what's important also is that ICPD has led to success. It's not a program that member states agree that then in the end up on a shelf. It did lead to progress, and we are better off in many ways than we were 30 years ago. Concept of uptake is increased. Maternal mortality has been down. 40% reduction in adolescent birth rates. Child mortality fell by more than 50%. So there has been success stories, and it's important to recognize that as a feel-good moment, that sometimes these landmark UN agreements that member states are being called upon to implement do matter and have changed the course of history. But what is also important, of course, is to realize, unfortunately, 30 years after, that there's still a lot of unfinished business, or as someone will say in the next panels or so, there's a lot of inaction that has happened, and there's a cost to it. We talked in ICPD about universal access, not just access to sexual reproductive health. We talked about universal access, meaning everyone, everywhere, at any moment. That has not been achieved anywhere in the world. I come from the Netherlands, and I can say there is no universal access to sexual reproductive health. Even in the Netherlands, there are groups of people that probably don't have that access that they would like to have. There's still discrimination against some of groups in society. 800 women die every single day. Tonight, when we go to bed in this resort, another 800 women have not survived their pregnancy. Every 2 minutes, a woman dies in childbirth, somewhere in the world. And we agreed that that was unacceptable and that should not happen. And it's entirely preventable, or at least most of it is entirely preventable. We can do better. There's a cost of inaction, of allowing this to happen. As we speak today, 250 million women do not have access to family planning, would like to use it. Their bodily autonomy is not secured, and that's important. 1/3 of women experience violence, often by intimate partners. 39 girls today, every day, are married off before the age of 18. Every single day, 39,000 girls whose futures are being compromised simply because someone decided to marry them off. Often forced, often not of their choice. And of course, the harmful practice that we mentioned, 3 million girls are subject, you don't see it actually behind my picture, but it is on female genital mutilation. 3 million girls are at risk of female genital mutilation every single year. That's the unfinished business that we are called upon to work on. Now, if you then look, that's the ongoing part. Then since Cairo, a lot of other new issues have come to the fore that we also need to deal with. The world doesn't look the same as it was in '94. There's a whole issue around demographic diversity. We have countries in this PPD that at this moment are being challenged by low fertility. That wasn't there 30 years ago, but today there is. And the flip side of low fertility is aging. And that's a problem. And that needs to be addressed. What do we do about that? How do we safeguard reproductive rights in a low fertility country? A very important issue for countries like Korea, Japan, China, etc., that are actually currently experiencing that. The magnitude of humanitarian crises, and how do we safeguard reproductive health in a humanitarian crisis? And they're much more bigger than they were at that time. Urbanization, people on the move, millions of people uprooted, leaving their houses, etc. There's a whole issue around reproductive technology that we don't talk a lot about. But there are all kinds of reproductive technologies that are being advanced, often over the backs of women, too. So again, an agenda we need to start looking at. And of course, we all talk about the impact of climate change. And I hope you all know that climate change has a direct impact on reproductive health. Maternal mortality goes up when the world's climate is increasing. We know that child marriages are going up in climate because of climate change. Why? Because countries and people feel vulnerable. And we see this. We saw it in COVID as a pandemic that, of course, led to increased child marriages and increase, of course, in particularly maternal mortality. So there is a lot of unfinished agenda. And so as a multilateral agency that supports member states, including all of you, because you're, of course, also members of the United Nations, we thought about, so how do you celebrate, how do you commemorate a 30-year anniversary in the absence of a conference? Because there will not be a summit like we had 4 years ago or 5 years ago next year, the Nairobi summit. That's not there. So how do you then still bring the world's community together and debate these issues that I just mentioned, the old ones and the new ones? And we thought about 3 objectives, because we thought it's important to bring this together around an arch, if you will, that connects the past with the future. We do think it's important to celebrate the past. We do think it's important to feel good about successes. And member states should feel good, because a lot has happened, as we just saw, for the good. So it's good to take stock of what has been achieved and feel good about that. But at the same time, there are things that are holding us still back. And here's, of course, where PPD has a very important role. Let's debate these issues. There are still issues where we don't agree on everything. Education of young people, for instance, and particularly sexuality education, whatever we're going to call it. There are issues that we are still not comfortable with. Well, let's learn, let's listen, let's see how we can overcome those in the present. And then to make sure that this agenda lives in the future, because it's an unfinished agenda. And there are lots of debates right now in the UN around the future agenda, the post-SDG agenda, if you will. How do we make sure that that's what that is so dear to our heart is being covered and not forgotten? Because let's not forget, this agenda is in many ways a sensitive agenda that many would like to see off, like to see forgotten, like to see marginalized. So we need to make sure that that's not going to happen. So here's the arch between connecting the past, the present, and of course the future. This is how we see this review process happening. Now, the review process, and I can go to the next one, hopefully, if someone can. Looks like this. And you're sitting somewhere, as you can see on the bottom here. One of the first events that are happening is this conference as part of the ICPD 30 journey. A lot is going to happen in the next few years. We had already the first regional conference in the Arab states. We will have the Africa conference, of course, next month, the Africa Regional Population Conference. We have the Asia one, we have the Latin America one. Then, of course, we have all these things in between that happens. We have the CPD itself. But we want to make sure that the CPD doesn't stop there, that the debate continues around population development issues all the way up, if you will, to the Summit of the Future itself. And we feel it's very important that we see that connection between the issues the CPD itself, which is the formal body of the ICPD, but not stop there, but also is being linked to the discussion that the member states have on this summit of the future. Because if it's not there, you have a problem. We all have a problem, because it will be much harder to make the case why this agenda is so important for development going forward. So this is the journey of ICPD 30. And here you're sitting in the middle of that journey, a very important step in that journey. And we're looking very much forward tomorrow to the call to action, of course, because that's a document we all can rally around and promote and use in all what's coming after this, starting with, for instance, the Africa Population Conference next month. Now finally, I thought it might be nice, and this is my last slide, Madam Chair, is then how can we as PPD, or as you as PPD, and us as supporting partners in population development, how can you then be situated in this journey? And I look back at the 3 objectives we set, and there's many that PPD and PPD members can do to link with that. First, remember, showcasing your successes, learning from each other, be proud of what you've achieved in the last 3 decades, and feel good about it, but share it among each other. What can we learn from each other? But then, of course, this is a fantastic body to facilitate dialogue. And that is so important. So use this forum that we have. We don't always look and look at issues the same way, and that's okay. We might have different opinions, we might have different solutions, we might have different ways of looking at the world, but let's dialogue them. And this is, of course, where PPD comes in as a perfect platform to do that. But also then, of course, to make sure that you are instrumental in advocating that these positions do get back into the intergovernmental fora when we move on, as I said, to, in the end, CPD and the Summit of the Future. And then I would like to really end with something that we never should forget. We don't do this because we think it's a good thing to do. This agenda, ladies and gentlemen, is transformative. Imagine a world where no woman dies giving birth. Just imagine that. We have never in the history of humanity had that. But just imagine what that means. Imagine that every woman has bodily autonomy, has full control over her body. It has never happened in humanity. And imagine that violence against women is no more. If we achieve that, that's at the core of ICPD. That will be truly, truly transformative. And because that is transformative for women and girls, it will be transformative for our world. I'll leave it at that, Madam Chair. Thank you.